All right, guys, I think we should start. I do see a few groups of people coming in, but it's worth getting going. So I can see what's happened. The previous group that came, Grade 11s last week, Tuesday, obviously asked you guys, or told you that the people in the front row get picked on, you know? So everyone shifted backwards. It doesn't matter how far back you go, you're still the front row, you know? Cool. So let's start. Thanks all for coming. As I understand it, this is 100% voluntary talk, so you're all here of your own volition. And is that not true? Oh, it's mandatory. Okay. Okay, I'm with you. You were forced to be here. All right, come in, guys, please. In the front row, the back row gets picked on. All right, cool, guys. So let's get started. All right, yeah, thanks, guys. You can just have a seat. Cool. So firstly, the reason why we're having this talk today. So this is all about academic optimization and improving your ability to kind of sit down and learn effectively, to have high levels of energy, and to just have an overall better school experience. And why would we do that? So firstly, as you know, it's becoming more and more competitive to get into the university space, either for a course that you're trying to get into or to a specific university you're trying to get into. It's becoming more and more difficult to actually get into the slot that you want to get into. In addition to that, as I understand it, you guys have had a pretty rough year. I think a lot, especially with the coronavirus and COVID and everything, it's hit you guys pretty hard. And so there's a lot of room for improvement. Am I right about that? I mean, have you guys experienced that? Okay, I'm seeing nodding. Cool. So we like to think of school really as a sort of a game. What I'm going to do in this talk over the course of the course is ask you guys a question, and sometimes it'll be a raise your hand question. So just to warm up, if we could all just raise our hands now, just to practice. There you go, all of us. Thank you. You're in the front. Thanks. Cool. Muscles warm. So what I want to know first is how many of you play any kind of sport at school by show of hands? Okay. Hands down. How many of you play any kind of video or computer game? Anything really? Yeah. Okay, cool. And other than those two things, how many of you are involved in some kind of competitive endeavor where you can either be good at it or bad at it, but there's some kind of competition? Show of hands. Okay. So that pretty much covers everyone. We like to think of school really as a similar thing. In other words, whether it's a sports you play or it is a computer game that you play, you can either just have a go and try and get better by playing and practicing and kind of getting into it, or you can step back, watch other people playing, get a coach, think about strategies that you can use to improve across like multiple domains, like meta skills that will allow you to learn and improve the game that you're playing better. And school really is like that, and not many of us, in my experience, view it that way. And so really the purpose of today's talk, across a couple of different sections, which I'll run through in a minute, is to give you not an overall comprehensive overview of all of the different tools and mechanisms you can use in the space, but really just to give you a few aspects to try and convince you that there is a better way to be playing this game, and with a bit of research and a bit of like dedicated time, like putting your head there, you can really improve the way that you approach school. And I'm going to run through the sections in a minute. We're just going to talk about a couple of tools in these subdomains. So firstly, the importance of sleep. Next, the importance of exercise and regular exercise, stress management and how to calm yourself down in like exam situations or when you're preparing for an assignment and you're feeling an elevated level of, let's say, autonomic arousal. Learning and study skills, time management, and then finally proactivity and independence. So these are the topics that we're going to be covering. As I said, I'm going to sometimes ask you to raise your hands. I would encourage you to participate. And then the front row, if I ask a question and no one kind of puts up their hands, there will be opportunities for that. Then I'll just pick on someone in the front row. So we'll go like that. Okay. Cool. Okay, so just to reiterate something that I said in the beginning, with these tools, you can become a far more powerful schoolgoer, let's say, right? And it all starts with energy and your ability to focus and be productive. And then it kind of builds up from there, your ability to learn more effectively, to understand things better, to remember details for longer, to spend less time in a study session and yet get way more out of it, and not just for a short period of time, but for a long period of time. So that the accumulated value of all of your studies and all of your efforts kind of add up to that final exam or to any test along the way. Right, so we're gonna start with sleep, and let's jump in. Okay, so this is how we would roughly define a good night's sleep, okay? If you are consistently getting between 7.5 and 9 hours of sleep, so every night, Monday to Sunday, let's say, if you fall asleep easily, in other words, you don't find your mind racing, you reckon it takes you somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes to just fall asleep once your head hits the pillow. You sleep through the night. I know many of you will kind of be waking up in the middle of the night and finding it difficult to go back to sleep. And then when you wake up, it's easy to wake up. You don't hit snooze, or fight with your parent when they come in the room. It's sort of easy to get up, hop out of bed, and you feel refreshed and like you've had a good night's sleep. So that's how we would describe a good night's sleep. How many of you feel like, according to this definition, you are not getting a great night's sleep? Show of hands. Okay. Yeah. So if you're interested in mnemonics, learning strategies, study habits, exam techniques, all of that stuff, to be honest with you, is pretty useless unless you have a good foundation, physiologically speaking. So that means good sleep, good exercise, good diet. We won't go too much into diet today. And there are many, many things you can do, and I'm going to cover 4, which are sometimes quite surprising, tools that you can just like incorporate into your daily routine now that will improve your sleep, and there's no question about it, okay? So tool number 1. Okay, who's heard of blue light before? Show of hands. Okay, quite a few of you. Good. So there's a lot of misunderstanding and misconception around blue light, and I want to just run through that first. Blue light or bright light in the mornings or in the afternoons or even up to sunset really isn't bad for you at all. It's not damaging to the eyes. That's not the problem, the fundamental problem with blue light. The problem with blue light is after the sun goes down, or at least within 1 hour of your bedtime, let's say, if you have a regular bedtime. Blue light and any bright light really, doesn't matter what color. If it's bright enough or a little dimmer but blue, it is sending the signal to your brain to not yet release a hormone called melatonin. So in other words, it's inhibiting the release of melatonin, which is a natural hormone that the body releases at night in order to send the body into a sleepful state, calm you down, you start feeling a little tired and lethargic maybe, like sleepy. You feel sleepy, like you're ready to go to sleep, you know? And what that intensity of light will do, or that frequency of light will do, is stave off your natural kind of like falling into sleep mode. And so if you're on your phone until late at night, or you're in a kitchen or a bedroom or a bathroom with bright lights on until when you go to sleep, you're going to find it a lot more difficult to go to sleep. It's just a physiological fact. So what can you do? You know, you can take measures as drastic as, and this will give you a sense of what you might want to incorporate in your routine, but if you're really finding it difficult to go to sleep at night, you can take measures as drastic as turning off the lights in the bathroom, passage, and bedroom half an hour before you go to sleep, right? In other words, navigating your house in the dark. You can turn your phone onto the, it's called blue light filter, or sometimes eye comfort, or sometimes night mode, but your phone will have a filter which prevents blue light, but still, if it's not blue, like it looks kind of yellow, but it's very bright light, that could be a problem. So you definitely want to turn it to blue light filter, but keep the brightness low, and actually preferably within half an hour of going to sleep, avoid the phone anyway. 2 reasons: the bright light and the blue light is harmful in that it prevents you from going to sleep. The second is it keeps the mind active and involved and kind of like aggravated, and so that can make it harder to go to sleep. So this blue light, again, just to recap, it's okay during the morning. In fact, it's probably good for you, and we'll speak about that in a minute. It's great during the day, but at night, just avoid it. Avoid any bright lights and avoid blue light. Number 2, so watch the sunrise. Aside from being a really nice kind of Zen habit to incorporate in your daily routine, this has many physiological benefits, and I'm going to describe the mechanism, and I'll describe how you can kind of use this in a minute. But first, I just want to know, so at the moment the sun is rising at about, let's say, 6:35. How many of you are awake before 6:30 these days? Show of hands. Okay, all of you. So There's a very specific quality of light that comes from sunrise in particular that isn't there, for example, at 10 a.m. It's a specific ratio of the different frequencies that you get from sunlight, and it's a specific intensity. And even if you're indoors, like the sun is coming through a window, it alters it in a way that it no longer does what I'm about to describe. If in the morning, around the time the sun rises, so if it's 6:35, then any time from, let's say, 6:30 to about 7 should be okay. If in the morning you get outside and you spend between 2 and 4 minutes not looking directly at the sun, but just being outside so that those photons are getting into your eyes, that sends a signal to your brain to release, and here's another hormone called cortisol. Now, cortisol you may have heard of as the stress hormone. In this case, stress, it's kind of a good thing. It gets you going. So what it does is in the morning, it allows your cortisol to kind of peak, and then it tapers down over the course of the day. And that's the way that you want to have your cortisol levels throughout the course of the day. And it has an effect on your sleep-wake clock. So that day, you'll find it easier to go to bed at night. But going forward, I mean, just one sunrise kind of has an impact on the following days because it sets that clock, which I'll describe in a minute. So if you don't do this, if you're missing out on this quality of light in the morning, then the cortisol kind of builds up over the course of the day and then peaks around the afternoon. And it's the stress hormone. And aside from kicking out your sleep-wake cycle, that's not so good for you. It can be quite counterproductive. Right, so watch the sunrise. Great habit to add to your stack. The converse, watch the sunset. This actually works for a different reason. I'm going to explain the mechanism as well. I think it's useful to understand the mechanism because then you can figure out how to use the tool and what will work for you and what won't. So again, aside from being a pretty zen habit, something to kind of throw in there, this has a physiological effect on the way that you kind of wake up and go to sleep. Firstly, it acts as a peg for your body to say, this is a certain time and I'm supposed to be asleep like a little while after the sun goes down. But more importantly, that specific quality of light, and again, you should be outside 2 to 4 minutes, not looking directly at the sun, that specific quality of light sends a signal to your brain that even though you might get blue light and bright light later in small amounts, it is time to go to bed soon. So studies show that it actually mitigates the effect of blue light later on in the night if you have been outside or in the quality of light that sunset provides. So this can be very powerful. That's tool number 2. Tool number 3. So how many of you have heard of this? Hot shower, cold shower, by raise of hands, if you've heard of this kind of thing before? Okay, interesting. So yeah, maybe if we have a bit of time, I'll speak about cold showers as well. But over the course of the day, from about midnight to 4 a.m., all the way up to the afternoon, your body is naturally warming up, right? And that has to do with the environment. The day is getting warmer as we approach afternoon. And it turns out that for many, many generations, when you're awake, your body's been getting warmer, and as you're falling into sleep, your body's been getting colder because of the weather and the temperature and the environment. So the temperature of your body actually has a huge impact on your body's internal sleep-wake clock. So if it's warming up, your body's feeling like it's becoming more alert, it's coming out of a state of of sleepiness, let's say, and into a state of wakefulness. And if it's cooling down, it's moving into a state of sleepiness and out of a state of wakefulness. So what a hot shower does, when you get into a hot shower at night, which I'd highly recommend about half an hour, let's say, to an hour before you actually go to sleep, is it heats the body up. Now you might say, well, when the body heats up, according to what I just said, you should be waking up. But once you get out of that shower, you might have experienced this before, your body kind of has a massive heat dump. After that hot shower, you cool down rapidly, and it's that cooling down which signals to your brain that it's time to go to sleep. And so it can enhance the depth of the sleep that you get into, and it can advance your sleep-wake cycle so that it's easier to wake up in the morning, easier to wake up in the next morning. Hot shower at night, it's a great idea. And then just to mention, because I alluded to it earlier, cold shower in the morning can have a similar effect, right? You have a cold shower, you get out, your body heats up rapidly, and that signals to the brain, firstly, to advance the sleep-wake clock, and secondly, to start waking up and getting going. It does a lot of other things. You get an adrenaline kick, which can kind of wake you up and get you going. It also puts your body under a bit of stress, and if you handle it well, in other words, you kind of like get into that shower, take a couple of deep breaths, don't allow yourself to get into a panic zone, then that can train the body under panic, which we'll speak about a little bit later. That can train the body to calm down under panic. So if you're brave enough for cold shower in the morning, if you're not going to do that now that it's kind of coming out of winter, then just a hot shower at night, highly recommended. Hot shower in the morning, opposite effect. If you're going to have a shower in the morning, try not to make it too hot. Okay, cool. So that was sleep. I'm going to speak a little bit about exercise. There's so many different kinds of exercise, and it falls into the same category, so we won't go through it too much. I do want to mention, I mean, how many of you have heard that you should get regular exercise, by show of hands, that it's a good idea? So what does regular mean? There's so many different ideas and perspectives on this that it's not really worth getting into the details. But somewhere between once a day and 3 times a week, let's say, I would consider regular exercise for a long enough time, whether that's 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, intense cardio, weight training, resistance training, whatever it is, that's the kind of exercise that I'm talking about. By show of hands, how many of you get regular exercise according to that definition? Okay, not everyone. So the first thing to do here is to start building something into your routine, and I'll go over that in a minute. But ultimately, what you really want to do is find something which you are interested in. It could be a school sport, it could be a recreational activity that you do, like rock climbing. There's so many options in this space, and if you just try a few, I guarantee you will become interested in one. And then to do that regularly, that's the ideal. But until then, when you wake up in the morning, take 10 minutes to just do a couple of push-ups, star jumps, squats, lunges, it could be pull-ups, whatever it is. If you just do something in the morning to at least start getting you into the habit, that will have a huge impact on your energy that day, on your ability to wake up, on the effectiveness of your sleep, and on your ability to cope with stresses like exams. A little bit of exercise every day can go a long way. There's no question about it. Okay, exercise. Right. This is the big one, right? Exam and project anxiety. So we find that many people feel some kind of nervousness or stress or too high alertness levels, either in exam situations, okay, which can cause you to perform worse than you otherwise might have, or when you're preparing for projects or even studying for exams before. So, but I'll ask you, I mean, how many of you feel in at least one subject some kind of exam anxiety or project stress or nervousness? Show of hands. Right, basically everyone, okay, save for a few. So I'm going to reiterate this. Great sleep and using the tools that I spoke about. And by the way, there are many more tools available, and there's actually a really nice article on our website, if you find it, under blogs, that describes like another 13 or something like that. So great sleep, good exercise, good diet. And what do I mean by that? Eating food and enough of it that makes you feel kind of energized and awake and alert and good and healthy, right? So whatever that means, you could be on this diet or that diet, you could, as long as whatever you're eating is good for you and it's something that you would choose instead of something that you're just going for because of the taste, right? So good dieting habits. Those 3 things will have a substantial impact on your ability to cope with stresses when in a fight or flight situation, right? Like an exam. But there's something else that you can kind of use in the moment that's very powerful, that has a lot of research behind it that I want to share with you today, and we're actually going to do it, and it's called the physiological sigh. Okay, so I'm gonna do it once to show you how it works, and then we're all gonna do it together a couple of times. It's a breathing exercise, and you will have heard of many breathing exercises and maybe even tried some for exam kind of anxiety. But this one is particularly powerful. It's based on some very clever mechanisms, and it can calm you down pretty soon. So we're gonna practice it together. These are the steps. Let's have a look. Okay, cool. So maybe just to speak about the mechanism first a little bit. You all would have you'll recognize this. When someone is having an anxiety attack or a baby is crying or someone is very stressed out, they'll be doing a kind of breathing which involves a double inhale. They'll kind of be going like that, right? So that double inhale was one of the key features of this physiological sigh. That's your body's way of calming you down and moving from an anxious fight or flight space, and we're going to take advantage of it. So step number 1 in this exercise is to breathe in, and you should breathe through the nose. So almost as deep as you can. So it's going to be like deep breath in And then step number 2, without breathing out, is going to be to take another deep breath in to really just kind of like fill the lungs as much as you can. Now, what's happening on that second step is all of the little sacs in your lungs, when you're anxious, a couple of them actually slam shut and become unusable, which means you're bringing in less oxygen, you're expelling less carbon dioxide, and what that second inhale does is it pops those open. So it's a deep breath in, and then it's another breath in, and then it's going to be quite a slow exhale, and then you're going to hold it out for a while. Now, the second mechanism that's playing into this tool is this idea of controlling your heart rate with your breathing. When your lungs are full of air, your diaphragm is pulling down, your chest is open, and you can imagine that your lungs are expanded, but there's another organ in here that is also expanded, right? It's in the same cavity, and that's your heart. So your heart is bigger when you have a full breath of air. And when blood flows through it, when it's bigger, the blood slows down, right? It's going through a bigger cavity, and so it's going a bit slower. And your brain's getting the signal that your heart rate is low, and so it sends the signal to speed your heart rate up. So when your chest is expanded, your heart rate is speeding up. And for the opposite reason, when your chest is kind of like squashed, when your lungs are empty, this cavity is squashed, your heart is a little smaller, blood is going through a smaller space, like a smaller pipe, let's say, and so it's going a bit faster. And so your brain is going to send the signal to reverse that and slow it down a bit. So what this tool takes advantage of in steps 3 and 4, which is why they're so important, is empty lungs causes heart rate to decrease, and heart rate decreasing calms you down. So let's do it all together. I'm going to do step 1, 2, 3, and 4 on this hand, and then this will be kind of like full lungs, empty lungs, breathe in through your nose, breathe out through your mouth. If some of you don't want to do this because you feel a bit embarrassed, that's fine, but I'd really like most of you to participate. Okay, so let's go. So step 1. Do 2 more times. Whew. If I was nervous before, I'm feeling a bit more relaxed now. Okay, so there are a couple of things that this is almost guaranteed to do. You'll feel some effect right in the moment, but it really starts to kick in about 5 or 10 minutes afterwards. So firstly, this fight or flight like stress response that you're in, where you're at a high level of, it's called autonomic arousal, is going to come down. You are going to calm down, right? You're going to become more relaxed, and that's going to allow you to be more clear-headed, more focused on the task at hand. It's a very powerful technique, and I'd recommend you use it. If you know you're going to be anxious, or if you are anxious, you can do this 3 or 4 times, once every 20 minutes. And even that much might not be necessary, right? I mean, how are you guys feeling? Are you feeling a bit more relaxed? Are you feeling different by kind of like nodding or shaking your heads? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nodding. You look more relaxed. Okay, cool. So that's the physiological side. Now, I spoke about something called autonomic arousal, and I just want to touch on that a bit because the next tool, it's important not to get wrong. You want to be at an alertness level, let's say, of here. This is the optimal zone. When you're feeling anxious and stressed out, you're high, right? You're up above that level. And that can cause problems for your focus and your ability to be clear-headed. And so you want to bring it down to this optimal zone. And a physiological side will do that, right? The opposite, although I don't recommend it, would be hyperventilation. That'll take you from a low, like too low autonomic arousal to, let's say, the optimal zone, or from the optimal zone to too high. I wouldn't recommend hyperventilating, but that's the opposite of the physiological sigh. If you're in the optimal zone and you do the physiological sigh, it might not be such a good thing because you're going to be too kind of relaxed and chilled out and lethargic, and that will also inhibit your ability to focus in the moment on the task at hand. So sometimes you'll learn a tool that'll calm you down and put you in the optimal zone. You really don't want to use it when you're in the optimal zone because it'll kick you out of the optimal zone. And so that kind of brings me on to the next one, Okay, by kind of like show of hands, how many of you have experienced after a big meal a kind of like lethargy? You just feel tired and sleepy and kind of like relaxed a little bit. Yeah. Big meals, especially carb-heavy meals, tend to do that, right? All of the blood goes to your stomach, and whatever's happening biologically speaking, you feel more relaxed, and it can be a little difficult to focus and be productive. But if you were going into an exam where it could be Afrikaans or science, English, maths, whatever it is, Afrikaans was mine in school. If you're going into an exam where you're going to be anxious and stressed out and like a little bit buzzed, having a heavy meal about an hour before, and maybe even a heavy carb meal, hence the potatoes, is something that will put you into a more relaxed space and might bring you into the optimal zone while you're in that exam, okay? Don't do this unless you're going to be in a buzzed out space, because you might get a worse result because you're too relaxed. So just watch out for that and think about that. But this is like quite an uncommon thing that can be very useful. Now, again, I've spoken about 2 things that you can do here. There is a wealth of things that you can do in this space if you're looking in the right places that can improve your performance under stressful situations. Right, so we've got about 20 minutes left. Yeah, let's do this. Okay, so we're now going to talk about time management and organizational skills. There's a lovely story I want to tell you. Some of you may have heard it before. It's quite a popular one, actually. In fact, I'll just ask you quickly, how many of you have heard of the story with jars and big rocks and smaller rocks? Show of hands? Okay, maybe not so popular. So, there's a professor and he's teaching some kind of class. It could be organizational management or productivity. And onto the kind of lectern, he pulls out a box, can't see what's in it, and he pulls out an empty jar. And he addresses the class. He takes out big rocks from the box and he puts them into the jar, and it looks something like this by the time he's done. And he asks the lecture hall a question. He says, is this jar full, right? And is it full? A little bit louder. I did hear some no's and yeses. Okay, so I'm getting a lot of yeses. Right, so the jar's full. Then he reaches into the box, pulls out a couple of smaller rocks. Good. Pulls out a couple of smaller rocks, puts them into the jar, and what happens? They fall in between the cracks. So they fill up to the top now, and he asks the lecture hall again, is the jar full? Yeses and no's. Okay, I've got some yeses, I've got a few no's. Why is the jar not full? There's still empty spaces in between the smaller rocks. So very good. He goes into the box and he pulls out, let's say, a cup of sand, pours the sand in from the top. The sand fills in all of the spaces, and once again asks the class, is the jar full? Is the jar full? With the sand. There's still air pockets, exactly. Brilliant. So no, gets a glass of water, fills it up with a glass of water. Now is the jar full? Absolutely, yeah. We can't fit anything more in there, okay? Sorry? Okay. What's the moral of the story? That's what he asks the lecture hall. Okay, so what's the point of this exercise? What do you learn from this? A show of hands. I heard an answer? Okay, I'm going to pick on someone. What's the moral of the story? Okay, wait, I do have a hand in the back. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so very good. So someone in the lecture hall puts their hand up and effectively says, you can always fit more in. Even when you think your time is full, you can always fit more in, right? Now, that actually happens, it's a good principle, although it's flawed, because if I had taken out another cup of sand, would I be able to fill it in? No. So it's actually not the moral of the story. The real lesson here, what do you think would have happened if he took out another jar, started with a cup of water, put the sand in, put the small rocks in, then try to fit the big rocks in? Would he have got everything in? Not a chance, right? The same amount of material would not have fit into the same size jar. The moral here, the lesson to take away, and it's a very powerful principle if you use it in your actual organizational habits. You have to put the big rocks in first, okay? When you have things which are very important, if you don't fit them in your schedule first, okay, to use the analogy, you aren't going to be able to fit them in. The space, the time will get taken up by small tasks. Sometimes they're important, sometimes they're not important, and then it'll feel like by the end of the day you don't have time to fit in the big rocks that you have. Now, I'm going to ask you very, very briefly, what are some examples, by show of hands, of things in your schedule that are big rocks? What was the first one? Important cycle tests, yes? In the back? Yeah. Yeah, you did raise your hand. Sorry? Assignments. Assignments are big rocks. Any other ideas? Okay, so you're right, those are big rocks. Okay, but now here's the thing. Those are already scheduled in for you. Is it possible to not show up to a cycle test because you didn't have time, you were busy doing other stuff? Not really. Is it possible, if you have a study session, let's say you need to do a study session for mathematics, a 1-hour study session, is it possible to not get around to that because you didn't find time? Yes. So when we say big rocks, we really refer to the things which aren't pre-scheduled in for you, but are important, that you should make important, because if you put them in, and you schedule them in, they're likely to be unhindered by all of the other smaller stuff that you might find you do instead, right? So it's thinking of things as big rocks and then scheduling them in is a great anti-procrastination tip. Now, I'm going to pair this with another idea, but I first want to speak about the other idea. So, okay, those are the principles. Let's see here. Systems versus goals. So there's an author that we like, Scott Adams. He wrote a book called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. And in it, he shares this idea, and it's very useful. He says, goals are for losers, right? That's actually exactly what he says. He says, instead, you should use systems. Why does he say goals are for losers? He knows many, many people who've had fantastic goals in life who have failed at those goals. In fact, when you look at people who are successful and you look at people who have failed at the task that they wanted to be successful at, both categories of people had goals and similar goals. So goals can't be the difference between, let's say, the winners and the losers, right? There's got to be something else. And that's what systems is. So the problem with goals is they're too far in the future. In other words, things that I'm doing today don't feel like they have a measurable impact. And we're immediate gratification seeking people, right? We want to have a result right away. So they're too far in the future. And then the second problem is they're too specific. If you have a goal of getting 86% in mathematics and you get 83% in mathematics, you might not feel so good. But that's a mistake. It's still an impressive feat that you did. If you're coming from a 60 and your goal is 72 and you hit a 69, that's a great outcome. And yet, if your goal was 62, you might be thinking, or let's say 72, you might be thinking, I didn't hit my goal. So that's not motivating, it's demotivating. So that's the problem with goals. On the other hand, we have something called systems. And these are things that are actionable. I can actually do them today. How can you tell the difference between a goal and a system? The one you operate, okay, and the other one you achieve. So you can't operate a goal of 82% for mathematics. You achieve a goal of 82% for mathematics. You can operate a daily habit of, let's say in the morning before you go to school, opening up your maths book and just opening to the page where you know the chapters that your teacher is going to be talking about. Not committing to doing anything more than that, but just committing to actually opening it up. Now, when you open it up, firstly, is that an activity which is likely to take you in the direction of the goal? Yes. And is it an activity that you can feel good after doing? Yes. And is it an activity that most times will lead to you perhaps looking at an example or thinking about the maths mark in advance or the maths work in advance? Absolutely. So those are systems versus goals, okay? Now, I just want to ask some examples. Can anyone give me an example of a goal, let's say? It doesn't have to be your personal goal. It can be a theoretical student's goal. Show of hands. Let's start with you.
Getting 80 in science.
Getting 80 in science, yeah. Going to varsity, getting into a university, brilliant. Any other goals? Getting into a certain career that you're going for. Maybe it's an accountant or doctor, XI, could be anything, right? Okay, you guys got unbelievable goals, brilliant. Any other examples? Okay, that's good enough for now. Now, think about examples of systems. It doesn't have to relate to the same goals, but think about examples of systems. What are systems? Show of hands. The thing you do to achieve the goal. Yes, exactly. So now your goal was getting into a specific degree, right? Getting into varsity. What are some systems that you could do on a daily or weekly basis that would get you there? So think about that and then put your hand up in a minute. Any other systems examples? Yeah, go ahead. You know what? Yeah, go ahead. Getting to sleep at a certain time. Setting yourself a time to go to bed and making sure you get into bed. That's a brilliant system. Go ahead. Setting time aside to study every day. That's a brilliant system. So you see, this is the difference between systems and goals. Now, when we say goals are for losers, what we mean is this, okay? they are useful in that if you don't have goals, how can you build systems which relate to the goals in a certain way? So you do need goals to set systems, but their usefulness ends once you've set the system. Once you have the system and you have something that you can do daily or weekly, whatever it is, which is powerful, that will have an impact on your effect in the world and your, let's say, your productivity, then focus on the system, okay? So what can you do now? Based on, okay, we spoke about examples, based on the two things that I've shared with you, okay? So we have big rocks and we have systems versus goals. This is a very simple activity. You can all do it today. Write down a list of all of your goals. Could be micro goals. I want this subject. I want this mark for this subject. Or it could be I want to get into a university. Could be anything. Cross out all of the goals and instead write examples of systems. Could be 1, 2, or 3 systems per goal that you have, that things that you can start doing today, which aren't so heavy that you know you're not going to do it. If you set a system of studying 2 hours a day for science, right? Most people will kind of like just end up not doing that. But if you set a system of committing to doing 3 examples of science before you do any other homework every day, that's an example of a good system, okay? So the systems will relate to the goals, and then focus on the systems. Okay, so in terms of organizational and time management and structure, this is a key idea, and I'd really like for you guys to implement this one. Now, spaced repetition, we've got 10 minutes left, which means we aren't going to be able to move through everything. So I'm going to go through this very briefly because there's a section at the end that I want to get to. There's an idea in learning and productivity which says if you spend the same amount of time doing something but spread out over time, you'll get a much better result. And even if you spend less time, you're likely to get a better result. So for example, if you spend 10 minutes a day doing something like science practice or preparing for a maths exam, you end up after 2 weeks, let's say 14 days, with just under 2.5 hours of work spent in that domain. If you instead of that did 4 hours the day before the exam, there's no question, according to the science, that you are going to have a much better result. Remember more, remember it for longer, understand it more deeply if you do the 10 minutes a day. So you're spending less time and you're going to have a much better result. Why? You're taking advantage of when learning really happens, which is when you sleep. If you do 10 minutes a day, you've got 10 minutes a day plus your brain doing all of the heavy lifting while you're asleep, and that yields a better result. I'll come back to that in a minute because we're going to talk about how to execute it. So this is the idea of spaced repetition, and you could do research on it, and there's a way to utilize it in your specific study habits. But there's one executable that I'm gonna kind of run you through. Now, we call this the work hard, less marks approach. Some people think it's the lazy approach, but it's the opposite because it requires a lot more work for the same amount of results. Okay, and what happens is, and I bet many of you are kind of following the strategy I did in school. Maybe we have a bathroom visit. Every time you need to kind of like get into an exam and have a good result, you might kind of be wasting your time in class, for example, not taking such good notes, maybe even losing the notes, not preparing every day based on the work that you've learned. And then when an exam comes up just before, could be the day before, could be 2 weeks before, you start preparing heavily for that exam. That requires a lot more time for the same result than what I'm about to propose, okay? And this is a great way to use spaced repetition in your study habits and routines. So, there are 6 steps to this cycle, and if you use it effectively, even if you use components of it, you're going to get a much better result. Step 1 is, so we have before class, during class, after class. Before class, you might want to open up your book, think like, and not the day before, not the day of, the day before. Open up your book, have a look at the chapter that the teacher's going to be going through. Just think about what you might learn that day. Ask yourself some questions about the work. What that does is, it activates your brain around the work, and then when you're sleeping, your brain's doing all the heavy lifting. You're opening up a whole lot of slots that when you're sitting in class, the work can easily fit into, and you're much more likely to remember it effectively. So before class, a 5-minute review can make a huge difference in your effectiveness in class. I'm sorry, I'm rushing through this. Then during class, many of you, like I said, will be misusing this time. If you actively learn in the class and you take powerful notes, don't write down anything that you aren't going to relook at. It's a waste of your time and you could be doing something much better. If you take notes that you're actually going to revisit and use, and you engage with the material, when your teacher's talking, you're listening, you're like debating in your head, you're thinking about how does this compare to what I learned about this thing the other day. then you will have to do way less work outside of class time, and you could be using that time for sports, recreational stuff. You're going to have to spend way less time outside of class time if you actually use this time in class effectively. Then after class, spending a small amount of time reviewing the work, maybe writing a summary, or even just writing down some key points on what you learned, discussing with a friend, even trying to teach the concept to a friend or teacher, whatever it is. That can be exceptionally powerful. It just cements the way we work and the way our brains work. If you're teaching something, it just cements the idea in your head. It can be very useful. So that's after class. Now, the next 3 steps are revision sessions, study sessions, and exam sessions. The first is study. So study session is not about preparing for an exam. It's not even about learning the details. If you learnt about something in biology, let's say, this is about looking at the content matter, thinking about it deeply, even reading around it, going and watching a crash course, a YouTube video, you might learn something extra about it. This is just about dedicating time, making it a big rock, to dedicate time to actually deeply absorbing and internalizing the work. Then, separate from this, you should schedule time to have revision sessions. Revision sessions are about the details. So now I'm actually almost preparing for an exam. I might make flashcards, I might make study notes, use my colors. Now I'm actually learning the content that I'm going to ultimately need to be able to produce in an exam format. And then separate from that are exam sessions. So this is where you want to do something that I bet many of you don't do, and it's a mistake, is practice past papers under exam conditions within a time frame without looking at the memo. How many of you do past paper practice by show of hands? Excellent, I'm very happy to hear that. Now, how many of you do full past papers, no memo, under exam conditions, and then only afterwards when you've finished, you mark it and you fully mark it according to the memo? Show of hands. Now, those of you who are kind of doing a question, looking at the memo, doing a question, looking at the memo, you're honestly wasting your time. You could spend the same amount of time overall and get like a 5x better result if you just do the whole exam, battle with it, struggle with it, and then mark it according to the memo and be strict on yourself. You'll learn the content much better, you'll solidify it much better, and you'll learn what the markers are looking for according to the memorandum exactly. I've got 3 minutes left. Okay, so we only have 3 minutes, unfortunately. I'm going to let you guys go at 25 past. I have a lot to say in this area, and it's actually almost one of the most important areas. We should have maybe brought it up to the front. Many of you will have heard of this idea called reactive and proactive. And the common misunderstanding about it is that proactivity is about preparing for like an event or a problem in advance, and reactivity is once the problem occurs, coming back and trying to fix it. And that's a useful idea, but it's not what we mean by reactive and proactive. What we mean is a kind of a mindset which can either allow you to become far more powerful and effective, or can hold you back from becoming as effective as you can be. So, proactivity. A proactive person is someone who takes ownership of a problem. They see themselves as responsible for all of the things that are happening to them, okay? In other words, I got a bad mark, it's my fault. I arrived at school late, it's my fault. I didn't get the subject that I wanted to get, it's my fault. I wasn't prepared for this exam, it's my fault. Now, what's the point of taking all of this blame, okay? It's not to make yourself feel bad, and it's not even really about assigning blame. The purpose of it fundamentally is to solve the problem. If you blame external factors, and there are always external factors, right? Whatever you've done or whatever result you have achieved or whatever it is, there are factors which were under your control and there were factors which were not under your control. The question is, what do you focus on? If you focus on the factors which are not under your control, you can't solve those factors. You can't generate solutions to prevent those factors from taking effect further in the future, right? If there was an accident on the road, there's nothing you can do about that. But there would also have been factors that were within your control, and if you focus on those and you emphasize those, you can actually do something. You can actually improve yourself for the next iteration, right? And so, although there's always stuff which is legitimate, which is happening, which will affect whatever you're trying to do, if you focus on the stuff that is within your control, your circle of influence, you're going to end up with a much better result in the long run. And so you really want to focus on that, okay? You can kind of see this in the language that you use. So this is the language of proactivity versus reactivity. Someone who's saying, I can't or I won't, you know, I have to. I have to is a big one. That's reactive language. I have to get a good mark for this exam. Because it's I have to or else what? It's like you're running away from something. Instead, I will, I can, I prefer to, or even I prefer not to. This isn't always about saying yes to things. Reactive would be, I can't study today. Proactive would be, I prefer not to study today because I have something else to focus on and I'm going to slot it in tomorrow. So you see the difference. Proactive versus reactive language. Last concept, and then we'll end on this. Deciding versus wishing. So you can see someone who has gotten a mark for maths or science or whatever it is that you find desirable. You could see someone driving a car that you find desirable. You could see someone performing well academically or in a sport or getting into a degree that you just wish if only you could get into that thing or get that maths mark or own that vehicle. And there are two kinds of people, and you really want to make a shift from the left to the right here. There are people who wish for these things, and there are people who decide that that's what they're going to do. You can see a car and wish you had that car, or you can see a car and decide that that's what you're going to do. And how do you do that? You figure out what's the price I need to pay in order to get that result, a certain amount of studying or whatever it is, you'll figure it out. And then you think earnestly about, is that a price that I'm actually willing to pay? And then if you are, pay it. And that's the idea with proactivity, right? Deciding versus wishing. So thank you, guys. I just want to end on one more note. We shared a lot of ideas today, and there are a lot more and a lot available online if you look around for it. If you even do 1/3 or 1/4 or 1/5 of the stuff that we've discussed today, it'll have an impact. You don't have to do all of this at once. You don't have to do everything. Some of the stuff's going to work for you, some of it's not. But if you just try some ideas, you're going to end up with a better result, and that's what we want for you. Okay, so thank you. Thanks so much for your time.